Good day everyone, my name is Clayton Mbibas and this is Lawrence Bautista and Vince Aaron Binyas. And today we are going to discuss the importance and how open source works. So
At some point in our lives, we all have used softwares like Mozilla Firefox, VLC Media Player, and Facebook at least once, and wondered how the programmers manage some of these softwares. Believe it or not, those programmers are not the only one managing and improving the softwares. There are countless people from around the world that have contributed in improving a program. Many people that are not part of the company are making their own feature and version of a specific software. This is all made possible with the help of open source technology. To start off, what is open source technology? Open source software is software that is made accessible for use, modification, and distribution under the same condition as when it was first created. Most computer users never view the source code, which is the portion of the software that computer programmers modify to determine how a programmer or application operates. A program can be altered by programmers who have access to the source code by adding to it, altering it, or repairing any problematic sections. OSS frequently comes with a license that gives programmers the freedom to alter software to suit the requirements and decide how it is distributed. The developer community shares knowledge with each other, solve problems, and jointly maintain and improve projects for the benefit of all. This collective approach is a key feature of open source. It allows customers to know how the code works, facilitating the development of the most innovative software. It allows reuse and recycling of code, making it easier to collaborate and achieve goals rather than trying to do everything yourself. Companies also have more options on who can support them over time. Rather than paying old school royalty changes, developers can pay for support and services that help them within their goals. There are so many reasons as to why open source is the biggest thing when it comes to software development. We will be discussing all about the open source technology, from its history to how it works and all the benefits that it will give to all the people. History of open source. Let's start with the history of open source. So, the idea of making source code freely available originated in 1983 from an ideological movement informally founded by Richard Stallman, a programmer at MIT. Stallman believed that software should be accessible to programmers so they could modify it as they wished. With the goal of understanding it, learning about it, and improving it, Stallman began releasing free code under his own license called the GNU Public License. This new approach and ideology surrounding software creation took hold and eventually led the formation of the Open Source Initiative in 1988. How is open source used in software development? In the world of software development, open source has been extremely influential. In reality, a generation of open source tools has been created and is still in use today by developers to aid with the early optimization and problem solving of open source code. Some examples include GitHub, SourceForge, and Launchpad. How does open source work? Open source code is typically stored in a public repository and distributed widely. Anyone with access to the repository can use the code independently or contribute to overall projects, designs, and functionality. Open source software typically includes a distribution license. This license specifies how developers may use, study, modify, and most importantly, distribute the software. According to the Black Duck knowledge base, 5 of the most popular licenses are MIT license, GNU General Public License or GPL 2.0, Apache license 2.0, GNU General Public License GPL 3.0, BSD license 2.0 or 3 clause new or revised. Examples of open source software: GNU Linux, Mozilla Firefox, BLC Media Player, Sugar CRM, GIMP, BNC, Apache Web Server, LibreOffice, and jQuery. So, is open source software only important to computer programmers? No. Open source technology and open source thinking both benefit programmers and non-programmers, because early inventors built much of the internet itself on open source technologies like the Linux operating system and the Apache Web Service application. Anyone using the internet today benefit from open source software. Every time computer users view web pages, check emails, chat with friends, stream music online, or play multiplayer video games, their computer, mobile phones, or gaming consoles connect to a global network of computers using open source software to route and transmit their data to the local devices they have in front of them. The computers that do all this important work are typically located in a far away places that users don't actually see or can't physically access, which is why some people call these computers remote computers. More and more people rely on remote computers when performing tasks they might otherwise perform on their local devices. For example, they may use online word processing, email management, and image editing software that they don't install and run on their personal computers. Instead, they simply access these programs on remote computers by using a web browser or mobile phone application. When they do this, they're engaged in remote computing. So, doesn't open source just mean something is free of charge? No. This is a common misconception about what open source implies, and the concept's implications are not only economic. Open source software programmers can charge money for the open source software they create or to which they contribute. But in some cases, because an open source license might require them to release their source code when they sell software to others, some programmers find that charging users money for software services and support, or rather than for the software itself, is more lucrative. This way, their software remains free of charge, and they make money helping others install and use and troubleshoot it. While some open source software may be free of charge, skill in programming and troubleshooting open source software can be quite valuable. Many employers specifically seek to hire programmers with experience working on open source software. Why make open source open source? Technology is continually evolving, updating, and adapting to better fit our daily needs. Google's innovative artificial intelligence engine, TensorFlow, is the technology behind its cutting-edge tools which recognize spoken words and search photos. Why then did Google make TensorFlow open source in 2015? The simple answer is that more heads together equals more progress. They hope that by opening up the table to other developers, they could create software better suited to their needs. More than 1,300 external developers have now worked on TensorFlow. This collaboration has meant that it's now one of the standard frameworks used to develop AI applications, which will help Google's own cloud-hosted AI services, thus completing the circle by putting the code out in the open. Google has ensured that they can profit from better software which will continue to evolve. Opening the software up to the public also provides the good promotion. When Google released its TensorFlow, it sparked significant interest in software now used by the likes of Dropbox and Airbnb. All in all, contributing to open source software has mutual benefits for all the parties involved, making sure nobody misses out on the latest improvements. So that is the last part of my report. And the next reporter will be Lawrence Bautista, and he will be discussing the differences between open source and closed source software.
I am Lawrence Bautista, and I will be discussing the differences between open source and closed source software. The factors, open source and closed source. Factors: the price. In open source, available for normal or zero licensing and usage charge. In closed source, cost varies based upon the scale software. Factors: freedom to customize. In open source, is completely customizable, but it depends on the open source license. It requires in-house expertise. In closed source, change requests must be made to the company selling the software. These bug fixes, features, and enhancement. Other factors is the user's friendliness. In open source, they're typically less users friendly, but it can depend on the goals of the project and those maintaining it. In closed source, they're typically more user friendly. As a for-profit product, adaptability and user experience are often key consideration. Another factors is the after sales support. In open source, some very popular pieces of open source software have plenty of support. Otherwise, users, forums, and mailing lists. In closed source, dedicated support teams are in place. The level of service available depends on the service level agreement. Factors: the security. In open source, source code is often for review by anyone. There is a widespread theory that more eyes on the code makes it harder for bugs to survive. However, security bugs and flaws may still exist and pose significant risks. In closed source, the company distributing the software guarantees a certain level of support, depending on the terms of SLA. Because the source code is closed for review, there can be security issues. If issues are found, the software distributor is responsible for long fixing them. Another factor is the vendor lock-in. In open source, no vendor lock-in due to the associated costs. Integration into system may create technical dependency. In closed source, in most cases, large investments are made in proprietary software. Switching to a different vendor or to an open source solution can be costly. Stability. In open source, this will depend on the current user base, the parties maintaining the software, and the number of years in the market. In closers, older market-based solutions are more stable. New products have similar challenges as open source product. If a distributor discontinues an application, the customers may be out of luck. Another factor is the popularity. In open source, some open source solutions are very popular and are even market leaders. In closers, in some industries, proprietary software is more popular, especially if it has been in the market for many years. Factors: total cost of ownership, or the TCO. TCO is lower and upfront due to minimal or no usage costs and depends on the level maintenance required. In closers, the TCO is higher and depends on the size of the user base. Another factor is the community participation. In open source, the community participating in development, review, critique, and enhancement of the software is the essence of the open source. In closers, this is a closed community. Factors: interoperability with other open source software. In open source, this will depend on level of maintenance and goals of the group. But it is typically better than closed source software. In closers, this will depend on the development standard. Another factor is the tax calculation. In open source, difficult due to identify monetary value. In closers, this will be definite. Another factor is the enhancement or new features. In open source, can be developed by the users if needed. In closers, requests must be made to the software owner. Another is the suitability for production environment. In open source software might not be technically well designed or tested on a large-scale production environment. In closers, most proprietary software goes through multiple rounds of testing. However, things can still go wrong when deployed in a production environment. Another is the financial production environment. In open source, the financial industry tends to avoid open source solution. If used, a vetting process must take place. In closers, financial institutions prefer proprietary software. Another factor is the warranty. In open source, no warranty available. While in closers, best for companies with security policies requiring a warranty and liability indemnity. So let's go on to the advantages and disadvantages of open source software. So the advantages: open source software is completely free. Next is open source is adaptable. Developers can examine how the code works and freely modify dysfunctional or problematic aspect of the application to better meet their specific requirements. The next advantages is that because the source code is publicly distributed, users can rely on it for long-term project. They know the code's creators cannot simply abandon the project or let it fall into disrepair. Another is the open source encourages ingenuity because programmers can use existing code to improve the software and even create their own innovation. Another is the open source include in a build community that constantly modifies and improve the source code. The next one is for new programmers, open source provide excellent learning opportunities. So let's go on to the disadvantages of open source software. The first one is that because of the difficult in setting it up and lack of friendly user interfaces, open source can be more difficult to use adapt. Next is the compatibility issues can arise when using open source software when attempting to program proprietary hardware with OSS. Specialized drivers that are typically only available from the hardware manufacturer are frequently required. Next is the liability issues can arise when using open source software. In contrast to commercial by the vendor, open source rarely includes any warranty liability or infringement indemnity protection. As a result, the consumer of the OSS is responsible for adhering to legal obligation. The next one is the cost of training users, importing data, and setting up an open source project can be unexpected. So that's all my part of my report, and the next topic will be discussing by Mr. Vince Aaron Viñas the benefits of open source in terms of education.
I am Vince Aaron Viñas, and I will be discussing the benefits of open source in terms of education. Open source software is making its way into education. Even though using open source is nothing new, we observe an increased demand for it across higher education institution. In education, they need high open source software. Digital transformation has been one of the key cross-industrial trends in the last decades. In higher education, digital transformation has been a long-standing effort to improve the learning and teaching experience, and the scope of digital transformation includes streaming the admission process and upgrading EdTech, digital teaching learning methodologies, improving accessibility and access to higher education, personalized learning, and better learning outcomes, and more. Benefits of open source technology for a higher education institution: flexibility, security, and cost effectiveness. Flexibility, the complexity and uniqueness of university system is a significant challenge for digital transformation. From technological standpoint, these technologies that were not designed with their specific needs in mind. Furthermore, nearly 70% of public sector employees believe their digital are inferior to those of their private sector counterparts, making it more difficult for them to adopt completely new system. Since open source software is a free to inspect and use, it can also be easily modified to match the exact needs of its users. And security, as I mentioned above, open source software has publicly available code. This means that it's available for everyone to see and inspect. And cost effectiveness, the cost of open source software varies, but on average, it's less expensive than proprietary software. User typically choose free trials or community version of the software at hand, which are usually free. This provides higher education institution with an excellent understanding on how a particular open source software would fit into their complex infrastructure. Additionally, open source software customization can be done in-house and does not have to be costly. Customization is typically charged extra by proprietary software vendors, and open source software avoid vendor lock-in. Principle of open source software: collaboration. Collaboration is education no longer simplified refers to teacher instructing student. Teacher must accept that the key of co-create the learning experience with their student in the order to truly embrace open source principle in education. Transparency. The open source software's transparency contributes to its improved performance. Similarly, greater transparency among teachers, students, and parents can lead to improved educational outcomes. For example, communicating expectation clearly at the start of the school is an excellent way. To reflect on school year is an excellent way. To reflect on a open source principle is in education. Meritocracy. This open source principle has a lot of potential in online education. In digital education, there are numerous teaching and learning methods available. As a result, students have more opportunities to innovate, showcase their ideas, and recognize for them. As a result, teachers should encourage their students to express themselves in a variety of ways and create a safe and inclusive environment in which everyone can thrive. Community. The open source community is essential to open source world. This principle is critical in education because every requires a community to succeed. Release and early and often. This open source principle refers to the practice of establishing a close feedback loop between software developers and users. It translates to continuous feedback in education, which helps students improve at every step of the way. It also stands for frequent communication process in order to improve it. Why making your product code free is a competitive advantage. Giving code away for free gives companies a competitive advantage. There are three key benefits of an open source venture, including crowdsourced product development, bottom-up sales, and generating trust among the developer community. While companies are vulnerable to their code being copied by competitors, the truth is that customer and the community still favor those who created a product's code, and they can retain loyalty despite being up against bigger players. Conventional wisdom suggests that successful software companies are built on proprietary data and code. However, in the past few years, the success of an open source or OS business model has challenged that view. OS companies collaboratively build products with the community and share their code in public repositories such as GitHub for anyone worldwide to see, download, and use for free. Multi-billion-dollar public OS companies such as HashiCorp or JFrog, Elastic, MongoDB, and GitLab have demonstrated the power of embracing this new community-led model. It's crazy to think that giving away your product's code for free has now become a competitive business advantages. The pitch for open source, in many view, the tricky advantage of building open source companies are crowded source product development, bottom-up sales, transform the developer community. In particular, the open source model has open interesting sales, go-to-market or GTM, and distribution opportunities. Crowdsourced product development. First, OS companies rely on the contributions of the broader developer community. Any developer around the world can contribute, particularly around the integration and bugs, with the approval of the core authors of the OS project. Developers that make community contribution are also incentive to evangelize the OS project. Often in job interviews, developers can use the number and quality of the contribution they make to prestigious OS project as important calling card. After all, community contribution from across the world enable OS companies to build new features and integration faster. Bottom-up sales of open source product. Second, open source serves as lead generation engine for sales. Anyone can download and use the software for free. Users can see and the code and configure it to their environments. This capability enables open source companies to acquire a vast user base that is especially helpful in enterprise infrastructure buying decision where it can be hard to convince a high-profile customer to run their infrastructure on young startup. Trust in developer community. However, if the customer already has developers in the organization already using the free OS software and can see the code and test and configure it to their needs, it's an easier decision for the chief information officer or chief technology officer to trust the startup in the buying decision users, and that's all. It's the end of our topic.
That concludes our report. So our topic is open source, the new norm for software development. I hope you learned something new about open source, and I hope you can apply it for your everyday life. So thank you very much for watching.